make sure we have a diverse team already. So when people apply, they don't feel like they're going to be challenged because of the name on their CV. If it's not of a Mark, a Steve, or anything like that, they have a name. Tajinder, for example, my name, they're not going to be judged on face value for the name on their CV. And it's a challenge. And I think the biggest challenge for that is making sure the company can make sure they're visibly diverse.
Welcome, everyone. It's such a pleasure to have you today. We're in Savile Row, one of the most iconic places when it comes to fashion and bespoke in the world. And I'm here today with Taj Phull, the managing director of Huntsman. Huntsman is probably the most iconic of the iconic brands in Savile Row. It's known worldwide. It's such an amazing place for people who love fashion, who love bespoke suits, who love all that relates to craftsmanship. And so it's such a privilege, honor, and pleasure to be today with you, Taj. Thank you for having us today.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
So Taj, maybe we could start by, we'll delve into, of course, your own background, because I think it's a big surprise for many people watching us today to see that the MD of Huntsman is a young man with diverse origins.
Yep.
We'll delve into that later on. We'll delve into the industry, your thoughts and about diversity in this industry. But I would love that maybe you could share with us, what is Huntsman? It's such an iconic brand for people who know about bespoke, who love, fashion. Huntsman, it's so iconic. So
Yeah.
in your word.
So, Huntsman in a few words, which will be really hard. Huntsman is established in 1849 by Henry Huntsman, hence H. Huntsman Sons in the title. Originally breeches makers, so a strong link to equestrian wear. So naturally our jacket style, without going too much into the detail in specifics, is based on a hacking jacket, so very cinched silhouette, high armhole, very comfortable to wear. So it's almost like a hybrid sports business jacket, which is very nice, and from a look perspective, quite pleasing on the eye. And when something's comfortable and looks good, you're kind of ticking two boxes straight away. But iconic in itself, because one of only probably several dozen brands in the UK. We celebrate 175 years next year, which is an incredible milestone for us. And I think
Phenomenal.
The biggest thing for us, there's only 2-3 dozen brands that, off the top of my head, that I know that celebrate such a big milestone. I was talking about this with a friend the other day, and Villeroy and Boch last year were 275 years, and they were globally known for porcelain. And you have Patek Philippe in 2012 celebrate 175 years, and these are almost household luxury names. And as much as Savile Row, at least 2 centuries amongst the tailors, I think the oldest is 212 now. Savile Row and Huntsman have a strong relationship for being the strongest.
Amazing.
So I think when you think about Huntsman, who we've served, and how we are from a craftsmanship perspective, we serve industry leaders in their field. So when you think about the world of fashion, you have Coco Chanel, Givenchy, Cristobal Balenciaga, all customers of Huntsman, but yet themselves have the brand names of the top Bond Street brands within their name. But yet wanted to do their tailoring with Huntsman. So that's a testament to Huntsman's craft, Huntsman's skill, but not only that, the passion and love that the team put into making a garment. The label and Huntsman as a company and a brand and a tailoring house is one thing. The relationship that a client, customers forges with a cutter and a client manager, a coat maker and a trouser maker, is the next step. You spend so much time with a cutter, him or her, in a fitting room. You create a relationship. Like myself and you, we've had this relationship now for about 6 months, and I think one of the biggest things within that is there's a barrier between friendship and clients, but you do get very friendly with your clients. You spend a lot of time with your clients, and that's always been within the history of Huntsman. When people have passed on Savile Row who have worked at tailoring houses, clients have attended funerals because they've had that relationship with them. When you talk about the pinnacle of tailoring is Savile Row, and then when you think about the pinnacle of Savile Row, I would always regard Huntsman as being the pinnacle, globally iconically known. And I think one of the easiest parts that I have within my job when I travel, as I do extensively, and I talk about Huntsman, if the person I'm speaking to at the time doesn't grasp Huntsman, I then just have to say the word Kingsman, and it all of a sudden becomes a click moment. I was in Korea last week, and I'm a big coffee aficionado, and I had this little 3-hour window in between meetings, and I was like to the driver, I want to go, this is the list of coffee shops. One of my friends gave me a list. I want to go here, here, and here. Can we do that within 2 hours? And he said, yeah. And we went into this coffee shop, and I was with my translator, and I was talking to the gentleman and the lady and the baristas at the coffee shop, and he was talking about, I heard the word Huntsman, and they were talking in Korean, and then I heard the word Kingsman, and just instantly it was like, oh my God, the Kingsman. And the Kingsman's globally recognized, but then it creates that bond to the brand, and then people all of a sudden understand the level of what we do, because people then reflected to when the film was shot, and the spies come into the shop and they see what took place in the shop, and then all of a sudden our respect levels from that just go through the roof. I'm almost messiah'd as I'm Eggsy from the film, but I'm not. So yeah, it's definitely something we can relate.
On the Kingsman topic, I'm posting those videos which are content videos. I'll come in one of these videos about Kingsman, because I think Kingsman is a very interesting film. It's, of course, a very good action movie, for sure, but there's much more behind that. It tells a very interesting social story, story about appearance, about mentorship, about changing life, changing horizons. I think it's very interesting. So I'll come back to this movie. So you mentioned something that really is a testament of how iconic your brand are and your company is the fact that you have customers around the world, which is absolutely amazing. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Huntsman is the first brand on Savile Row to open a store in the United States. So traditionally, tailoring, the hub was Savile Row. When you think about the travel we still do now, our global footprint at Huntsman, I think is probably the biggest on Savile Row. But having a base here, a base in the United States, in New York on 57th and West is significant. But within the United States, we traveled East Coast, West Coast, so Texas, LA, California, Boston, Chicago, about to embark on Canada for 2024, which is a new market for us. And then extensive travel through Asia. So we traveled 6 countries in Asia: Taiwan, China, Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand, and South Korea. And the Middle East is a grand market for us. You think in the Middle East in 2018, we only traveled to Abu Dhabi and Dubai. Now, just the recent trunk show, we have just done Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, Dubai. I think that's it. Yeah, that's it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So North America, Asia, Middle East,
Europe. We do Switzerland.
Of course. Switzerland, of course, Europe. It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. And by the way, I'm always so surprised when I'm in your shop here in Savile Row. The number, the language is spoken by people entering. It's like.
Yeah. Yeah. And also one of the biggest things downstairs is also having a team from a diversity perspective that's able to communicate back. So we have it many a time within the business. I would say languages wise, we have English, Italian, Spanish, Polish, Korean, Hindi, Urdu, Arabic.
That's phenomenal.
I think that's all the languages, and English being number one. I think that's all of them. But yeah, that is...
that's phenomenal. Let's park that one for a second, if you're okay with that. We'll come back to this topic. So, Huntsman is such an iconic brand. When I relocated to the UK, my English friends told me, here is the list of things you need to do while you will be in the UK and in London. And one of the very high in the list topic was you need to go to Savile Row.
Yeah.
You need to have a suit from Savile Row, which I did with you.
Yep.
So it's very iconic. So it's very British in a way. Okay,
Yeah.
Everyone thinks of Savile Row and Huntsman like the pinnacle of craftsmanship in England, in the UK, and so it feels like a very, very iconic British brand. And so I would like us to know a bit more about you, because the first time I met you, I was surprised.
Yeah.
I was really thinking I was going to meet someone who was in his 50s, 60s, a British gentleman, and I'm seeing you, a young guy,
Yep.
visibly with a diverse origin. So could we know a bit more about you, Taj?
So I'm 38 now. I started in tailoring probably around about 14 years ago, round about then. And I think going back a little bit further, I studied law. So culturally, parents being Asian, mum was born in Kenya, raised pretty much in the UK. My father was born in India and then came over when he was in his early teens. So culturally, moved to the UK in a turbulent time. During their upbringing was very racially challenged, you could almost say. Lived in southeast London. Racism was very high during a period of where the BNP was obviously in its growing strength. And living so close to the headquarters was an interesting time. So many a story my father had shared with me of his experiences and clashes with racial groups, and that kind of just makes you aware further to how you're accepted in society and how you're not. And even during my upbringing in the 90s, I lived in Eltham. I lived in southeast London in Plumstead, but attended a secondary high school in Eltham. And this all happened during the time of the Stephen Lawrence murder. So you think about Stephen Lawrence was on my bus route to school, the bus stop that he was murdered. He lived right by a friend's house, Ben. So the social tension that you have within the area, within the communities between the ethnic community and then the white British community was very high. The simmering points were always there. If you heard of an argument, a fight or a clash, you already knew that 95% of the time it was racially motivated.
Wow.
And to when I left high school, secondary school in 2001, it was still there. And you would think the millennium, when you had a turning point from a big calendar point and everyone was talking about the millennium bug on computers, we had so much modern technology and evolution in the way that we worked at the time, but yet racism was still a big factor within a secondary school. Adult life aside, this is your foundation of when you're growing and learning and absorbing as a sponge. The surrounding environments around you were so racially tense, it made upbringings challenging, and it put a different perspective in your mind of how people are when you were challenged, why you were challenged, and probably put you more aware to those scenarios. Then went on to had certain challenges in my life, which meant my upbringing paused at some times for educational perspective, but then pursued law. And then after doing law, I decided that I didn't want to pursue law after working 6 months in the legal sector, and decided that I wanted to do where my interest lies. And I know we're going to talk about success. That's probably one of my reasons around success. What is success? What defines success, should I say? And decided that tailoring was something that I wanted to do. And it was more of a question of dressing well, something I always knew. My dad wore a jacket a lot of the time, but he always wore a shirt and trousers. I don't ever remember my father owning a pair of jeans. My mother was always quite smartly dressed, but mostly traditionally. So for me, dressing well was very important. Presenting yourself was very important.
That's so beautiful. That's
relatable
amazing.
to the Kingsman. So you could
No,
always
but
say
that's absolutely beautiful, because you choose a completely different type of career and future for yourself, and you went for that, right?
My brother's still within the medical industry, so when you think about where our parents put us down, that was the cultural drive, you could almost say. And then remembered some of the challenges that I had when I was looking for a job. And it was in an era where I would say there was a massive talent pool within luxury retail. So albeit I had incredible qualifications, previous experience and had drive, how do I get into tailoring? And I really struggled. And one of my friends, who's still a friend now and actually does a lot of the recruitment for us here, said to me, you need to think outside of the box and go and work within luxury, but not within tailoring, just to gain the experience.
Oh, wow.
So then I worked for Clarins for a couple of years, a skincare brand, which was very interesting. But I worked within the West End area, so on several counters, working for them on a business basis, which was very interesting. But set a foundation in terms of knowledge, experience, understanding the fundamentals of luxury retail, and then went on to work for TM Lewin on their flagship store for a short stint, a couple of years. But again, put me within that environment of understanding then menswear and also understanding things like the basics of running a business. When you think of P&Ls and pieces like that, it gave me great exposure, and then went on to do a longer stint at Gives & Hawkes. So between Savile Row, Sloane Square and the City, worked for Gives & Hawkes within their private tailoring department. So that was mostly made to measure and bespoke, which was great. That was, for me, not my steepest learning curve, but one that I really gain knowledge of what craftsmanship is, because until then I only had my personal knowledge, and the internet wasn't as vast as it is now to gain information. You also don't have YouTube and the blogging channels where you can find out more, like Kirby Allison and bits like that about tailoring. You now have a pool of endless information. Social media really plays a big part on tailoring and understanding, so I had to gain this hands-on on the job. And post that, I was recruited by Saville, which is next door, and they are a globally recognized fabric merchants. They produce their own cloth, but they also have a ready-to-wear and made-to-measure offering. So part of my role there was to expand the European business for them on made-to-measure. And working within the store here on Savile Row was an incredible opportunity, because I was able to see firsthand the factory experience from when they were producing garments in a factory, but also the fabric weaving experience. So the knowledge isn't just about the craftsmanship of the garment, it's that pre-process with the fabric. And cloth is incredible. I think when I talk about cloth, my passion, craftsmanship and making the garment is insane and incredible, but cloth is when you look at all the stages of cloth, with the yarn weaving, then the fabric weaving, and then the finishing, how they create this cloth from one yarn, essentially sheep fiber, to create the garments that we're wearing now is an incredible process. So that was a different learning curve at Saville. And that was incredible. They're a European company based in Brussels, so did a bit of traveling to Brussels, which was really nice. But they are a global brand. So when you look at Gives & Hawkes as a global brand, but global in the sense of they travel to destinations and clients travel to them. Saville produce fabric for everyone. They produce for Hermes, Brioni, Burberry. They are truly global. You could walk into a luxury retail store and you would 9 times out of 10 find a Saville cloth somewhere. Even if it wasn't visible, you would know it was Saville from the finish. And then post Saville, went and did a 3 and a bit year stint at Suit Supply, which was my steepest learning curve. One from the perspective of exposure. This is a company that the owner did incredibly well with. He went from 2000, late 99, to when I was there having just over 100 stores globally in 2015. The expansion and growth for Suit Supply has been incredible. They found a real good place in the market, and you was really exposed to the next step of business. And for me, when you're looking at supply chain on the level that you're looking at supply chain there, it is a monster. And also you work with it was a diverse environment, but diverse in a very, in my opinion, unique way. It was diverse by country culture, but not necessarily diverse by ethnicity. And I think that was probably one of the hardest parts to grasp when you're in a room and you're the only person of color. And that was probably the first time when I was in a room with a significant high levels of leadership, and you were the only person of color. And that was challenging at times. One, to how you feel you could get your voice heard, but then also how you could grow. And I think that's the biggest things. And enjoyed every minute working there. And everywhere I go, I absorb every bit of information like a sponge. Always listen first and then question after. Never cut off the conversation and bits like that. But then in 2018, decided that I wanted to step away from that slightly more mass-produced garment and go down the path of working back on Savile Row. And then came back to Savile Row and worked for Huntsman since 2019, to which I've been a managing director since 2021.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
What an amazing background. And you know what I love in what you're saying is this notion that you've learned things from different perspectives, different angles. A career is never linear. It's never straightforward. It's always, a patchwork of things. And what you're saying about how you went through different angles, you learned about supply chain, you learned about clothes, you learned about luxury brand, all of that. That's really interesting. And at the end, that kind of accumulates and that brings you the expertise and the broad know-how in your own business, which is a very important way of learning things, right?
Yeah. I think one of the things is the reason why I've been able to do that and listen to information is my father passed away when I was really young. I was 17 years old. So within my household, I didn't really have that fatherly figure. So I had to look at other fatherly figures from different aspects. So I understood that you're going to get information from different avenues. It's how you digest that information, take it on board, and then really try and do something with it. I was fortunate enough, my grandfather was here up until 2 to 3 years ago, and he had a very successful career. He moved from India just during the partition, moved to Kenya. So he then had to set up again in another country. Again, albeit there was a strong Asian community, there wasn't the biggest community, but Kenya being ethnically diverse, acceptance within community was readily done. He worked for the police, there was chief of police. He was also spokesman for Jomo Kenyatta. So in terms of the broad spectrum of what he did was incredible. He was even in a film with George Clooney. So he went to, I forgot the name of the film. He went on to be an interpreter for this film. And there was a scene where they were filming one of the foremen at a building site with a megaphone. And the person who was hired for the role couldn't do it. So they turned to my grandfather and said, "Could you be this person?" And absolutely took it on. So in terms of a role model, he's great. His son, who is my mum's brother, again, when my father passed away, solid male foundation within the close availability to speak to and have information and seek guidance and whatnot. So they've seen me on this journey of growth as well, which is great for them. But also I'm never shy to ask a question. I need some help on this, I need some help on that. And it's being able to listen to information and take arrogance aside out of it. People would say to me that you're incredibly successful, why do you need someone to give you guidance? And it's like, there's always a learning curve.
We all learn.
I've not hit my roof, and I don't feel there's a roof for anyone.
Absolutely.
You continue to learn, and for me, if you're always learning, you're doing something right. And that's the same with the cutters downstairs. When you speak to the cutters and we talk about even the coat makers. I was talking to Steve 3 weeks ago, who's like one of our incredible coat makers downstairs and been with us for some time. He was looking at a garment, couldn't figure it out. And even at it's plus 30 years in his career, he's still figuring out things and trying to get past conundrums and bits like that. And it's always learning, and that's for me always learning.
Yeah, learning is a key attribute of that, right?
Yeah.
So let's delve a bit about the notion of diversity, because let me share with you my experience of Huntsman. So a couple of years ago, it was top of my list, going to one of the iconic places to get a suit done. And some of my friends told me, here are the 2 or 3 ones. And so I've entered the three different, shops and companies in Savile Row. And when I entered Huntsman, something very special happened. So first of all, the place is of course beautiful, it's iconic, and it's a bit intimidating, okay, when you're entering those places, and it feels a bit, intimidating. And when I entered, it was very unusual in the sense that there were a lot of white British men, but there were a lot of non-white persons.
Yeah.
And I vividly remember that.
Yeah.
There was an Arab guy in the shop floor. There was someone from Indian origin. There was someone who was Asian, probably Chinese or something like that. So, wow, that was a huge difference. So, how was that intentional? How did you manage that?
A degree of it was intentional, and I think one of the biggest things that I've understood when I've worked or when I've shopped and been in various department stores and whatnot, one thing I understand globally, especially when it comes to tailoring, is where our future markets and our current strong markets are. And for example, when we hired Michael, who's now the store manager, who was hired as a salesperson, he was our Mandarin speaking sales client manager in the store. So his focus would be to serve his customers in the store, but then to also host the trunk shows in Asia. And one of our strongest markets at the time was China. So having a Mandarin speaker just naturally comes to accommodating clients that walk in. Post-COVID, that's slightly changed, but we have a Mandarin speaker in store. We have now Raf, who pretty much deals with mostly our ready-to-wear. He's Arabic speaking. We have Krish, who speaks a bit of Arabic, speaks Hindi and Urdu. And then you have Dan and Michael, who are Dan's been here 4 years, sorry. David was the gentleman who's been here for 7, 8 years, but then also been within tailoring for quite an extended period before. So you, in terms of having specialists culturally, incredible, but also from a skills perspective, we have interests in shooting wear, horse riding, all these experiences that create what is the world of Huntsman from a lifestyle perspective, and who our customer is. So we could confidently service anyone that comes into we just had it this morning. A gentleman's come in from Bahrain, wants to be serviced. So we've just made sure the right person's been paired up with him. And now he's speaking to someone who visits Bahrain and can speak Arabic. So it makes the customer at ease. And for example, like you mentioned, intimidating environment. If your local language is Arabic and you come into a store and you're already intimidated before you come in, you don't want to be also judged on your English when you can't communicate your English as well, because no one speaks the language or understands it. And that's where I think from a modern brand, you have to think about who your customer is. And where that customer is coming from, and our footprint now. When you think about, we also service Switzerland, and going as far as east. Out of those 13 odd countries that we serve, we can communicate with 7 of those in their local language.
Fantastic.
Which is superb.
Which is fantastic, absolutely. And the second thing that really, I'm going to share that one with you, because it tells also a story about who we are and our own prejudice. So when I started coming here, and I had all the first measures of all of that, so they introduced me to the person who was going to be my cutter, my tailor, right? And of course I was thinking that I was going to meet a Brit guy in his 50s, all of that, and I see coming this very young woman.
Yeah.
Franny,
yep.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And I had a kind of step back moment, saying, "Wow, isn't she too young or something?"
Oh.
It was the way we think, and I And I thought of myself, wow, but in fact, I'm having prejudice. Okay, I'm prejudiced because she's a woman, she's young.
Yeah.
And I must say, the way she did the job is like properly phenomenal.
Yeah.
She was so talented, so passionate, so into the details, understanding that. I think the first fitting I had here, I had like something 6 or 7 fitting. It was a huge work for her to really understand my shape. Of course, I'm, unbalanced like everyone.
Everyone is. Yeah.
So, and I find that phenomenal. And so it kind of also reconnected with me with myself in the sense that I thought, okay, but you prejudice, we all have our prejudice, okay? And she's phenomenal. And by the way, never ever change her for me, please.
No.
Because you're right. It creates a kind of a very deep connection, very...
Absolutely.
She understands so many things about what I like, what I dislike, and all of that. And so all your customers experience that. So this women company is really very interesting too. And I think you have quite a lot of women working for your company. Could you share a bit about that?
We have a very high level of women working for us, and I think when we talk about some of the stats, we have around 50%, just under 50% male, and a percentage that identify as non-binary, and then a percentage that is women. But when you think about the cutting team is formed of Campbell and Dario. Then you have also Tom. Tom is soon to move to America. Then you have Magdalena and Franny. So you're talking 40% of the cutting team is a forge of women. One who is the head ladies wear cutter, and Franny, who, going back to Franny, we'll talk a little bit about her. Not only is she female, she also is dual nationality. So she is half Indian and half British.
Which I didn't suspect it at all at the beginning too. It was really a surprise for me too.
Yeah, and I actually had to ask her how she identifies her ethnicity on the weekend, because everyone identifies differently. I identify as being just British Indian. For me, when I talk about culture, it's Indian. But Franny is obviously of dual nationality, and yet Franny's is probably what I would say is the exemplary example of what Savile Row is for the right person. When it comes to success and drive, she is incredible, 10-10 right the way through from that perspective, and probably in the most challenging environment, because I think as much as it was judgmental from when we have male customers come in, she has to then go and measure the male customer in a scenario that can be very tricky and intimidating for herself in her own way. What she would be considering is her own job is also quite intimidating, because also Franny, like myself, isn't the tallest person in the world, and you then have the height issue sometimes, and she just handles this in such a professional way, as you've experienced as well.
It's phenomenal.
And when you talk about always working with her, we work on a consistency basis, so you'd always have Franny there as a cutter right the way through. But she's come right the way through the ranks. Franny started in the trimming room, which is pretty much where most apprentices start from an entry-level job, and then went on to be an apprentice with Campbell, who's our creative director and co-head cutter, and she worked under an incredibly talented cutter to be an incredibly talented cutter herself. And
that's phenomenal.
In all of those challenges, helped us with breaking the diversity barriers here. So she's been very much involved in making sure that there's been women acceptance within the business, which we've always been clear on. And I think a lot of this started when Pierre took over the business in 2012-13. Pierre was very much about diversity, and I think the biggest thing for us, the question has never been behind the curtain about, is this person too ethnically diverse? There's never been that conversation. I don't even know how to word it, because the conversation's never been there. But it's one of those things where we know that we look at our team and we can see diversity. So for us, it's just making sure that the diversity is at the right level. We have people of colour within senior, women within senior roles, and making sure that balance is correct, but also making sure that the talent is correct for the role as well. That's also very important, but it's never something that's a barrier. You're held back, Huntsman, because you are male, you are female, you are black, you are Indian or whatnot. We are very much focused on, it's about skill set.
And I love what you said about the fact that it, of course, you perpetuate that as a leader, as a company, but it started before you with previous leaders, and it's something that grew and became stronger and stronger. Now today you have nearly half of your team, which is women, and you have a broad array of ethnic diversities, which is absolutely amazing. The industry is not considered very easy for women in general. Is that the industry? What's your thoughts on the industry more broadly?
I think when we talk about Huntsman being almost, if we're talking about all the tailoring houses on the row, and you speak about diversity from that perspective, I would say Savile Row isn't that diverse from both gender and race, not only gender. And I think that reflects in how when you hire, you have to make sure when you hire people with skill sets, you hold on to those people. And when we talk about Savile Row from the gender perspective, no, it's not easy, because I would say majority of the tailoring houses customers are male. So I do feel like a lot of the tailoring houses think about who's going to serve their male customer. And I think for them it's a harder part to have a woman doing that. You do have now you have women in tailoring, which is like a group for women to talk about their experiences within tailoring. So it's all the women within tailoring, whether it be students who have worked within tailoring houses. They get together from a networking perspective, which is great. I think we're quite fortunate enough that we have quite a large female base within our own business, which is great, because when we look at other businesses and we look at the race and the gender figures, we know that we're head and shoulders above what's going on Savile Row. But I think you can identify the challenges of Savile Row if you walk up and down. And I know friends who have had experiences from going house to house and not had the best experiences at other tailoring houses. And that's sad, because we are in 2023, and yet the talent pool from a race perspective, not only gender, at the cutters level, is very much, I think if you looked at the stats, I would say, if I was to think off the top of my head how many female cutters we have on Savile Row, we have probably 50% of them at Huntsman.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Probably 50% of them at Huntsman, because there are, just off the top of my head, 2 other female cutters on Savile Row. So you have Catherine Sargent, who, in my opinion, was incredibly pioneering, because she was the first woman to have her own store on Savile Row as a cutter. She worked with me at Gives and Hawks for a brief period of time, and she has her own brand. And in terms of being a woman within that industry, to be the first cutter as well. Amazing. And one of that has a recognition globally. So you know she travels to the United States. You know she's incredible at what she does. She now has a store just off of Savile Row. And then you have a lady that works at Edward Sexton. And then we obviously have Magdalena and Franey. So if we're thinking about the 4 off the top of my head, and apologies if I've missed out any, but those are the 4 that come to the forefront, and 50% are within Savile Row at Huntsman. Probably the unfortunate part, there's probably less cutters of race diversity. Luckily enough, Magdalena is Polish, so again, diversity there. Franey is obviously dual heritage. But when we think about cutters who are ethnically diverse, you would have Andrew Ramroop, who's incredible. He's got his own business just 2 doors down. Again, OBE, so services to the industry, is incredible. He's of West Indian origin. From a brand perspective, you have Oswald Boateng, not a cutter, but has his own brand, and it has a significant impact on the market and awareness more from the fashion perspective of African origin. And then you have Michael Brown, who trained on Savile Row, who now has his own brand, who's, again, an incredible cutter. We're pulling out very low figures, in my opinion, whereas you then look at the white British element, and you have a significant amount right the way through. So I think there's opportunity to grow that from an apprenticeship base, but it's also having the interest from the apprentices to come forward, and it then results back to the intimidating environment. I was talking to someone who was British 2 to 3 weeks ago at a dinner, who's young, shops at many brands, and still said Huntsman was intimidating to come in as a customer. So it's how we soften that to come in. Intimidating to come in as a customer. Imagine working somewhere that's intimidating for the customer.
Absolutely.
So it's really how we make sure we have a diverse team already. So when people apply, they don't feel like they're going to be challenged because of the name on their CV. If it's not of a Mark, a Steve, or anything like that, they have a name. Tajinder, for example, my name, they're not going to be judged on face value for the name on their CV. And it's a challenge, and I think the biggest challenge for that is making sure the company can make sure they're visibly diverse and accepting, because it's one thing to be visibly diverse, it's another thing for people to be accepted within the business and make sure that they have relevance.
Retain the talents and all of that.
Yeah.
And you know, it's interesting to see how what you're mentioning applies to many other industries.
Yeah.
I come from the tech industries, but I worked with so many different industries.
Yeah.
And so it's exactly the same topic. It's how do we create this traction and this openness and bring the talents? Because you were mentioning that to become a good cutter, it takes years and years. And by the way, when you see the know-how, the expertise, you understand it takes years to really get good at doing that, and probably you only have the best of the best, so the creme of the creme. You know? So how do you have this conversation with the Savile Row, other fantastic other companies here about talent pools, finding the right talents, retaining talents, opening up to broad diversity, women, racial diversity, whatever. How this conversation goes?
I sit on the board for Savile Row Bespoke. So I think one of the biggest challenges for me was walking into that room at the age of 36, being the only person of colour. Young and diverse, and also I'm not shy to say something either, so sometimes got myself into trouble for it, but I say things how it is. And as much as I like to think that Savile Row has a tradition and heritage, Savile Row as a brand name, it's almost like you think of the Beatles, you think of Abbey Road Studios, and people want to take a picture on a zebra crossing. When you're thinking of Savile Row, you're thinking of top-level tailoring, you're thinking of the road sign, people take pictures, you're thinking of when the Beatles, actually funnily enough, the Beatles did their last concert on the rooftop at number 2. It's iconic globally. You can say Savile Row to a lot of people. It's like when you go to any country and you say Manchester United or Coca-Cola.
Exactly.
It's one of those globally recognized brands without seeing the brand. So when you're working with the SRB, and the function of the SRB is to protect bespoke tailoring, but also to create talent. Now, a lot of applications come through the SRB and they're distributed out when everyone is hiring. To create talent, you need to have enough applicants, which I feel we do. You need to also have enough positions. So from the apprenticeship perspective, we currently have 3 undercutters, which is significant. We could have a 4th next year. We have 4 apprentice coat makers and 1 apprentice trouser maker. And in bespoke tailoring, we have to put 3 to 5 years investment in our time of them. And that also means they need a teacher. So we've got to spend time with one of our other members of the team teaching them. So we're fortunate enough that we have one of our coat makers who has 2 apprentice coat makers working with him. And we brought him in at the start of this year, 2023, just to make sure that we have someone who can work on the next generation. So he is now working with Joanna and Chucksy. So within the team that he has Chucksy, who is a person of color. He's a black gentleman. And then we have Joanna, who is a female lady. So in terms of diversity, and there was no, it's just they were the right person for the role. And for us to scale bespoke, you need to have that. Now, not everyone is operating on the same level. But it's a matter of making sure the right person comes in for the role, and they've got to want to love tailoring. One of the things that you mentioned and I said was passion. Now, Franny can make you a garment like that, not a problem. It's her being happy with the garment to go out the door, and that is where the passion lies. She has to have that satisfaction in her work, and that's why it took the extra fitting to make sure that we got to the right place for your garments. And that is the hardest part to find, is someone who's driven to not just do the job from the glitz and glamour perspective, because I think what happens is you do have it from time to time. You hire someone and they think it's all easy. I'm going to come in, I'm going to cut loads of suits, I'm going to make great garments and go. But you're not, every single customer is a mannequin. You have customers who are tall, customers who are wide, posture. These create all sorts of change. You've got to have a real passion in what you do. You've invested 3 to 5 years of your time, number one, of doing an apprenticeship role. And it's probably one of few apprenticeship roles that we have left in the UK. You probably have plumbers, electricians, but when you're talking from a craft perspective where your end product is a piece of art, in my opinion, it's one of only a few roles in the UK. Maybe shotgun manufacturing would be one because of the engraving that goes into it. But from an actual art form, artists themselves are born artists. They're not taught art. Whereas with this, you have to have a combination of passion, but then you've got to be able to harness you've got to be able to absorb what you're being taught. And that only comes from your passion. Because you can be taught something, if you're not passionate about it, the work you do is going to be substandard.
Totally agree. Yeah. And it's all about passion and the beauty of clothes and craftsmanship and expertise and know-how. It's so complicated and complex. I think people don't understand it until you really try to touch that. You see how complicated it is to get the nice finished product, as you mentioned, something someone is proud to wear, and your team is proud to get out of the shop. So that's absolutely fascinating. So I'd like to forge about this, what you mentioned about how young people grow within Huntsman, within Savile Row, all of that. So success is we mentioned that earlier in the conversation. We said it's what success means. Okay, it's very personal. At the end of the day, we all have our own different stories. We all have, our own ambition, and that's totally fine to have completely different level of ambition, totally different ways of living. So if we think about your own background, which is quite interesting about what you said about your family background, your ethnicity background, where you grew, how you wanted to get into this industry. If you were in front of a young person today, what will be the 2-3 main advice or tips you will give to them? Of course, I know that there's hard work, but I just posted a video where I acknowledge the importance of hard work, absolutely. But I also have a few question marks about hard work. I think it's way more than hard work. So what would be your advice to a young person?
One, for me, always experience something. I think if you see something that is a challenge, don't be afraid of the challenge. And for me, that's a separate part of the hard work. I think that's getting your head over something that you feel is too hard and dissect it. What do I need to do to get over that challenge? It might not necessarily be hard work from a physical perspective. It could be looking at the environment externally. It could be one of the hardest things that I did when I came back to Savile Row was I had just been in a £350 million plus monster retail business, running the personal tailoring for them and dealing with the training, how that environment came down to slowing down. How I was going to, at one point, think of how do I fill up my days when one of my commutes was to Amsterdam and bits like that. So for me, one of the challenge was making sure, looking from the outside in is almost put yourself in the customer's role. So it's that understanding of the challenge that I think really, if I was going to give someone advice, is understand the challenge. Probably the second bit, always set a goal. Set a goal for where, and don't set the goal of, I'm coming in as a salesperson, I want to be a supervisor, I'm coming in as apprentice coat maker, I want to be a coat maker. Think of the next step where you could take that, whether it be in 10 years time your own business,
like that.
but set a goal that I would always say is high but achievable, thinking of what you could put into it. And I think when I came into Huntsman, I came in as a brand development assistant, almost in a way that in my life I wanted to take a slower step. In post suit supply, it was busy, let's say. I did a lot of traveling. It was very busy, very long hours, and I just wanted to slow down a little bit. And then I came into Huntsman and I realized what I loved, and it was that pinnacle of tailoring. And then as I went up through the ranks, obviously my experience was there on paper. It was more of a sense of making sure you could show what you could do. So for me, it's setting the goal is a big one. Third piece of advice, always ask for feedback. I think naturally in life, when you get rejection, everyone takes rejection and that's it, goes away with it. I didn't get X, Y, Z, or I didn't do this, Y, that. Ask why, because that's only going to make you grow. It could be something very simple that you did from a mistake from a language perspective. Some people don't realize when they swear. Some people don't realize how they are with body language. And those are, when you're talking about being at a higher level, those are the things that can be the mitigating factors. And I would always say, always ask for feedback.
So interesting.
Because,
So interesting.
again, you've got an opportunity to learn. You're never not going to get a second opportunity. Like you've mentioned to me about your experiences and how many setbacks you had. Maybe looking back at that point when I was 22 years old, had I asked feedback then, my next opportunity might have been the one that changed. And I always like to hear, when I've done something that's wrong, what did I do wrong? Like, tell me. I might not take that information away and utilize it in the correct way, but I've asked for it and I know it's there. And that's more my own learning. But
That's so powerful.
I think there's a lot of people that can take away and be able to handle the self-critique, because self-critique is really important, because so long as the person who's giving you that criticism is someone that you feel that they have valid information, then you can really take away from that and see that's in that person's eyes, this is what I was doing
totally
wrong.
agree with you.
Yeah.
And it's so tough sometimes to take. Sometimes it's very painful, but in the midterm, it's such a wonderful, powerful investment, because we learn so much about ourselves, what we can improve, and things about.
Yeah.
And we always leverage from there. So it's an amazing advice.
Yes.
So you mentioned take the challenge. You mentioned learning before that.
Yeah.
Challenge, learning. You mentioned set a goal.
Yeah.
Realistic but ambitious, and ask for feedback.
Yeah.
Take feedback and cope with that. Learn from that. Grow from that. Right.
Yeah. And it could also open up your eyes when you think about the diversity perspective, from what you thought might have been a diversity situation might not actually have been. So without being too bitter on others around you, it might actually be something that you've done.
Totally.
And I always set I like the self-critique part, because I like someone to tell me when that isn't correct, Taj, this is how you should do it, or what was you thinking? Or for me, that's the best way of learning, because you learn from your mistakes, but you actually have to learn from your mistakes. But someone's got to be able to flag them to you, and you've got to be able to take it on the chin. I think that's the biggest part, is being able to take that on the chin. And I feel like, I'm not saying now feedback, the approach to feedback you have to really think about. I'm quite old school. I played football in the secondary school level where there was no filter. So feedback would be pretty blunt and pretty graphic. So you have to think about where you work and how you say that now. But if given to you in a constructive way, you should be able to take that, but you've got to be able to digest it. And that's the biggest thing. Taking that on without being, oh, that's not what I was doing, or that's not right. You have to be able to listen to someone else. And that's the biggest thing. Maybe because I've done so many appraisals in the past 12 years that it's one of those things that when you're doing appraisals or doing feedback to people, that's the one thing that they don't take away. And that's the one thing I think people should, because it's only from a growth perspective. Some people take it well, but I would say if I was mentoring anyone, listen to what someone's got to say. Always hear them out.
That's such a powerful advice. Taj, listen, we're at the end of this interview. It's the first one with the leader of diversity within the diversity seminar. I'm so genuinely grateful to you and to Huntsman to have had this first one. I think it's such an amazing symbol about both the initiative, but also who you are as a company, as an industry, and as a person. I mean, I learned so much in our conversation. I already loved so much Huntsman, but now I love it even further. You have me as a customer for life. I'm sorry to tell you that.
That's perfect. No, and it's refreshing for us to hear, and it's great to be part of it. Genuinely, when you approached me to have this conversation, some of the things that I was thinking in my head was, who else could you have? Because I think there's so many people who are leaders in diversity, but then when you actually think about it, there isn't. And that was one of the hardest challenges. So I look forward to watching the rest of the series.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And we will have a few others. As you mentioned, there's not that many in Europe. I'm connected with some of the leaders in Europe in different type of activities. By the way, when I say leaders, could be CEOs like you, but could be also, other type of leaders.
Yep.
And there's not that many, but there are.
Yeah.
And many of them said, yes, we're willing to do that. So we will hear from other type of diversities, other type of perspective, other ideas. That will be absolutely awesome. And I'm sure our audience will enjoy so much, being inspired by persons like you with their very own background experience, which is personal to each and every one of us. But this is so fascinating. So thank you so much, Taj. And thank you to Huntsman too.
Thank you for your time.
So thank you to all of you for joining us again today. In the coming weeks, you will see, of course, the usual posting of new episodes from the content series. We will discuss other key topics regarding, how to have a successful career, how to balance work and life in the corporate world. And also, of course, we will have other leaders joining us in the coming months for other interviews. So it's always a pleasure being with you. As I mentioned to you, stay positive, enjoy every day, go for it, and we'll see you in the coming weeks.